Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 541 Partner and Cute Shangyuan Bingshu, Part a Half. After reaching an agreement with the 7th Princess Xietain, Shangyuan Bingshu and Bai Zemin set to work together with the other sea creatures that were still alive to eliminate the slightly more than 300,000 zombies that remained on the bridge. With the intervention of 3 such powerful existences, among which one of them possessed the power of a maximum second-order existence, and 2 of them possessed the ability to fight and even defeat third-order existences, the remaining zombies and few beasts were unable to put up any kind of resistance. The death of the apocalyptic power zombie had caused the overall strength of the zombie army to plummet, as they now did not attack in waves, but attacked in small groups. So, it didn't even take 30 minutes for all the zombies and beasts to be completely annihilated. While the Sea Princess together with her subordinates was in charge of taking all the blood of the zombies, as well as their share of the beast army, Shangyuan Bingshu and Bai Zemin were in charge of taking the 70% of zombies that belonged to them, according to the agreement formed before joining an alliance with Xietain. The Sea Princess was generous enough to control the waters and bring back the lifeless bodies of the zombies that had been swallowed by the sea once they fell into the deeps as a result of the powerful shockwaves and stray magic attacks from the main battlefields. Although Bai Zemin and Shangyuan Bingshu had no one to help them, the speed of the 2 was fast enough to check dozens of corpses in just a second. However, when the idea that they didn't have to worry about the destruction of the soul stone struck them, the speed at which the 2 of them checked for the existence of a soul stone in a zombie's head increased explosively. Now, for every second that passed, at least 1,000 zombie heads were exploding. Only the smallest portion left a beautiful glowing stone behind amidst the bloody mess, while the other heads just exploded without doing more than spewing out blood and broken bones. Unfortunately, even though the 2 were very fast, the number of zombie corpses they needed to check was simply colossal. 70% of 20 million zombies was a number high enough to scare anyone after all. Needing to check 14 million bodies at an approximate speed of 1,000 zombies per second, Bai Zemin and Shangyuan Bingshu would need about 4 hours before finishing the whole process. However, it was not as if they both had any other choice considering the circumstances, so after dividing the bridge into 2 lines, they both set to work. With him on the north and her on the south of the bridge, blood blocks and ice blocks fell from the sky continuously. The heads of the zombies exploded one after another at thunderous speeds, and the terrifying sound of skulls being crushed was spread by the strong winds blowing across the sea. Time passed quickly, and as humans and sea creatures worked without disturbing each other, it was only another hour before the sun would rise again. When the clock ticked 5 o'clock in the morning, Bai Zemin and Shangyuan Bingshu met again in the central part of the bridge. "From the shine in your eyes, I guess the result on your side has left you satisfied," Bai Zemin said with a slight smile of amusement as he saw the excited look in Shangyuan Bingshu's beautiful eyes. "Of course it has." Shangyuan Bingshu nodded vigorously. The corner of her lips lifted upwards to give birth to a heavenly smile on her charming face as she said in a dreamy voice, "I found over 1 million unclassified soul stones. Now everyone in our faction will be able to evolve their skills smoothly to at least level 5 unclassified. Many will even be able to upgrade their main skills to first order." Unclassified soul stones had long since ceased to be indispensable resources in the eyes of Bai Zemin and Shangyuan Bingshu. However, this only applied as far as the monster skills of monsters like them were concerned. For normal soul evolvers, unclassified soul stones were treasures, as they were the quickest way to become stronger. "I found just over 1,500,000 on my side," Bai Zemin chuckled. Even though he was terribly tired, Bai Zemin couldn't help but feel that at least all his effort and the danger he had experienced in these past few days had paid something in return. Over 2,600,000 unclassified soul stones, approximately 600 first-order soul stones, 3 second-order soul stones, and 1 third-order soul stone. This was all the loot that Bai Zemin and Shangyuan Bingshu managed to gather after taking care of the corpses of beasts and zombies alike. With all this meat, even if 5 years pass, it will be enough to feed 500,000 people with ease. Bai Zemin sighed gratefully as he realized that with the corpses of the giant beasts, his faction would no longer need to worry about food for a long period of time. "Even if our population grows to several million, it shouldn't be a problem. Now, one of the major concerns of ruling has basically disappeared in the short run." Shangyuan Bingshu's eyes flashed with a glint of coldness as she looked in a southerly direction. Although the coldness in the gaze of Shangyuan Bingshu only lasted for an instant, this did not manage to go unnoticed from the sharp eyes of Bai Zemin. He and she had experienced many things together over the past 2 months, from good times to bad times, from times when they felt dislike for each other to times when they put their lives in each other's hands. Therefore, it was impossible for her to hide anything from him once she unconsciously showed some agitation in her soul's windows. Therefore, after a few moments of consideration, Xietain looked her in the eyes and said in a slow voice, "It will be soon. Once we cross this bridge, except for the northern area, we will be connected to all the districts and sub-districts of China. 80% of Beijing will be conquered by us very fast. Do you know what that means?" The current Xietain was basically unrivaled on Earth. This was a fact that both he and Shangyun Bingshu had accepted as fact, even though it was impossible to know with 100% accuracy. With food no longer being a problem, and with the now enormous number of unclassified soul stones, as well as the considerable amount of First Order at their disposal, not only did the Transcendent faction led by Xietain not need to stop worrying about feeding citizens and troops, but the overall strength of the current and future army of soul evolvers would skyrocket to a great extent. It was no longer necessary to be so careful. Once the important things were settled, the speed of Xietan's conquest would soar like a rocket bursting beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Once we start to conquer Beijing, we will have to face that man, Shangyun Bingshu said calmly. She looked Xietain in the eyes and nodded. "Don't worry, I'll take care of that when the time comes." Xietain looked at her without saying anything for several seconds before nodding slowly. Since she understood, then there was no need to say more. Shangyun Bingshu would soon be forced to decide what to do about her father. It would be solely up to her whether she wanted the man to live or die, and regardless of whether the person called Xuanyun Wenchen was a saint who had saved the lives of countless during the apocalypse, Xietain would not hesitate to help Shangyun Bingshu fulfill whatever her wish might be. Even though the rules said that they could not murder just for the sake of murder, Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu were basically the two central pillars of the entire faction. It was simply nonsense to try to compare them to normal citizens who needed to obey to the letter. They were the ones who made the rules. The sun slowly began to ascend over the distant horizon, and as the black cloak that covered the sky began to tinge crimson red, the darkness that reigned supreme soon became a thing of the past as the bright light took over. Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu watched in silence as the dawn rose soundlessly and enjoyed the slightly warmer sea breeze. As the sea creatures finished doing the job, both of them were silently lost within their own minds. But if he and she decided to expose their thoughts, they would probably be surprised as they were both thinking almost the same thing. Shangyun Bingshu was thinking about her mother, silently praying and pleading for her well-being. Xietain was not much different. He hoped that all of his family members were alive and well, despite knowing that the odds of both of those things being met were not particularly high. Just a short time more. A week at most, and they would finally be forced to face reality, light or dark, life or death. Xietain, Shangyun Bingshu. A soft voice sounded from the sea as both he and she looked at the setting sun, and when they both turned in that direction, they saw the seventh princess still riding her wave slowly approaching the bridge. The giant Leviathan had long since disappeared, but the sea princess clearly hadn't completely given up her vigilance, as she still kept some distance from the two humans, which was perfectly normal, considering they were not only of different races, but barely knew each other. "As per our agreement, my race will take 50% of the defeated beast corpses, and 100% of the zombie corpses," Xietain said with a bittersweet smile. She seemed to be experiencing both joy and sadness at the same time. With the loss of over 90% of her troops, the Sea Princess would experience hard times once she submerged into the waters again. However, obtaining several million bodies with which to feed her race, it was certain that the Mermaid Princess's problems had been alleviated to a great extent. Xietain looked at the Mermaid Princess, and after a few seconds' consideration seemed to have made up his mind. He waved his hand into the air, and his storage ring flashed. A small body with a shattered heart and crushed internal organs floated in the air before slowly falling to the ground. That's Xietan's eyes sparkled powerfully, and her heart pounded fiercely inside her chest. While the Mermaid Princess was excited about the corpse, Shangyun Bingshu was shocked by the sudden magic act of Xietain. Where on earth had he gotten that body from? She simply didn't understand what was going on. "This is the corpse of the beast leader," Xietain said calmly. "Before I left, I took it with me, and according to our agreement it would belong to you, but my human race has no use for the zombie leader's corpse, even though it is a third-order treasure. Therefore, I would like to exchange this beast body for the body of the third-order zombie." "What do you have in mind?" The seventh princess did not immediately get angry at Xietan's words, and instead tried to reason. After all, if Bai Zemin wanted to harm her, he could simply say that the beast leader's body was destroyed when he killed him, and the mermaid princess would not be able to disprove it. Since I kept the third order soul stone from the zombie leader's corpse, then the untouched and unexplored body of the beast leader should be yours. Honestly, I could have kept both of them, but since we had a deal, I'd like to hold up my end. Bai Zemin said in a deep voice. Xietain, I will hand over the skull of the beast leader to you. I don't know if it has soul stone or not, I haven't checked yet, and it will depend on your luck. Xietain finally understood what Bai Zemin meant. Since humans couldn't make use of the zombie's corpse, but the sea race had no problem eating it, Bai Zemin wanted to exchange the zombie leader's corpse for the beast leader's corpse. But since he had taken the soul stone from the zombie leader's corpse, and to avoid conflicts, he decided to give the beast leader's head to Xietain. Again, it was a win-win situation, no matter which way one looked at it. Okay. Xietain nodded easily, and the way she looked at Bai Zemin was now much friendlier. You really are different from the rest of the humans I've met in the past. Even though you could have kept the beast leader's corpse to yourself without saying anything, you kept your end of the deal. You have my respect. Bai Zemin felt a little embarrassed to hear the words filled with honest praise from the mermaid princess. After all, even though he was keeping his word, it was also true that he had other motives for doing what he was doing. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 542 Partner and Xietain Bing Shu, Part 2 halves. After cutting off the head of the beast leader and handing it to the shark man of before, Bai Zemin watched as the creature knelt at the edge of the bridge and respectfully handed it to the mermaid princess. Damn, this kind of scene really should be recorded for posterity to see. Bai Zemin muttered under his breath. The corner of Xietain Bing Shu's mouth twitched a couple of times as she said without looking at him to the face, I'm afraid posterity might see more amazing things than a bipedal shark walking on a bridge with an ape head in its hands and handing it to a mermaid with eyes full of adoration. Xietain seemed oblivious to the conversation Bai Zemin and Xietain Bing Shu were having. She waved her magic staff and said a few words in a language that no human could understand. Swoosh! A new giant wave rose from the sea under the mermaid princess's control, slowly approaching closer to the wave she was using as a surfing table. Under the dumbfounded gaze of Bai Zemin and Xietain Bing Shu, Xietain picked up the approximately 40 centimeters long small animal on top of the wave and patted it a couple of times, while she looked at it with loving eyes. Damn, this kind of scene really, yeah, whatever. Xietain Bing Shu cut off Bai Zemin's words on the fly as she stared at the little animal in the arms of the mermaid princess. The little animal was actually a beautiful dolphin. However, unlike the normal dolphins that everyone knew before the world changed, this dolphin was light warm pink in color, and its eyes were the same pink as its body, but in a slightly deeper shade. Every time the mermaid princess stroked its little head, the little creature let out cute sounds and looked like it was smiling tenderly by the way it moved its mouth. This little one's name is Xiao Xiao, and she's a second-order spirit dolphin. Xietain said as she continued stroking the little dolphin. Her words almost caused Bai Zemin to choke to death as he stared at the harmless-looking little beast. That little dolphin less than half a meter long was a second-order beast? Somehow it looked so weak that a normal dog could bite it to death. Looks can really fool you. Bai Zemin sighed and shook his head as if a new world had opened up in front of his eyes. Xietain Bing Shu gave him a sidelong glance and said in a flat voice, Look who's talking. Xietain looked at Bai Zemin and Xietain Bing Shu steadily, pausing her caresses on the little dolphin for a moment. Then, she said somewhat puzzled, I understand that you two are partners, but could you please listen carefully to what I am saying? This time it was Xietain Bing Shu and Bai Zemin's turn to stare at Xietain. The two stood silently with their eyes fixed on the mermaid princess, as if they had been hypnotized by some kind of black magic. Then, as if by prior agreement, he and she stared into each other's eyes for a couple of seconds before turning their faces and saying as if they had practiced it several thousand times, Partners, isn't it? Xietain tilted her head, and even the little dolphin in her embrace inclined her head as she looked with her cute eyes at the two humans, looking really confused. How odd, I can smell her scent on you and his scent on you. Xietain muttered as her eyes darted back and forth between the two. At first, Bai Zemin and Xietain Bing Shu didn't quite understand the meaning behind the mermaid princess's words. However, when they both thought of a certain event that happened a little over 3 days ago, their expressions froze. While Bai Zemin seemed to feel somewhat guilty, Shangyuan Bingshu looked extremely embarrassed. Her usually indifferent face, devoid of visible emotions, suddenly changed to an expression filled with panic, and her perfect white skin suddenly acquired a slight blush that seemed to slowly grow deeper. If any member of the Transcendent faction were to see the expression on the current Shangyuan Bingshu's face, their mouths would probably fall open, and their eyes would explode out of their sockets, as it would be extremely difficult for them to associate the feminine expression on her face with the deathly cold expression she always carried. Even her closest friends would probably not be able to believe that Shangyuan Bingshu could put on this kind of expression. Seeing the expression on Shangyuan Bingshu's face, Xietain realized that something must have happened between the two of them. However, since for some reason they both seemed to feel awkward about it, she decided not to mention anything about it. "Oh well, I guess whatever happened between you two is none of my business," she said before returning to the main topic. "As I was saying earlier, this little girl here is a second-order spirit dolphin. However, she is not a specifically combat-oriented creature, despite not being weak at all. Her main ability is communication." "Communication?" Bai Zemin looked at the little dolphin doubtfully. He didn't linger too much on the matter from before. After all, he believed Shangyuan Bingshu understood the reason why he had no choice but to put his lips on hers back then, during the invasion of Oblong World. As for the matter of their tongues going a little crazy in the process, Bai Zemin blamed the lag. On the other hand, Shangyuan Bingshu looked lost as she gently bit her lower lip. She had barely heard whatever the mermaid princess had said. Regardless of what thoughts Shangyuan Bingshu had or how crazy the emotions running in her heart were, the mermaid princess continued to explain. "Right. This little girl can communicate with anyone she considers an ally regardless of distance by sending out a spiritual wavelength." Xietain put the little pink dolphin on the wave that carried her before, and after saying something to her, the little creature nodded prettily towards the princess. Then, Xietain waved her staff, and under her practically perfect control, the wave soared over the bridge and stopped just a meter away from Bai Zemin. Bai Zemin's black eyes met the pink eyes of the little dolphin, and the two stared at each other for more than 10 seconds amidst blinking. Then, the little dolphin let out a small low sound as she wiggled. "What are you doing?" "Get her," Xietain said with a frown. Bai Zemin for some reason could not feel malice towards the little animal. Perhaps it was because he didn't sense any threat coming from the little pink dolphin's body, but not caring about the fact that he was allowing a second-order existence to come so close to his body, he stretched both arms forward, as if to grab a baby. The little dolphin by the name of Xiao Xiao squirmed a couple of times in Bai Zemin's embrace until she finally found a comfortable position and lay still. Not even 5 seconds passed when the little creature closed her eyes in a comfortable way as if she was going to fall asleep. "Oh?" Xietain looked surprised to see the little pink dolphin's behavior. She looked Bai Zemin up and down for a couple of seconds before saying quietly, "That's weird. Usually, Xiao Xiao doesn't feel comfortable in the arms of someone else other than me." Even though I already thought it was weird that she didn't complain when I told her she'd go with you for a few days, seeing her feel comfortable enough to sleep in your arms is really something else. Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. He seemed to ignore everything the mermaid princess said, and instead focused on one thing. "What? What do you mean she'll have to come with me for a few days?" he said with wide eyes. Xietain rolled her eyes and said as if it was obvious, "If we don't have some method of contacting each other, how am I supposed to know when I need to show up to hold up my end of the deal? You couldn't be expecting me to stay here until your side finishes setting up to cross this bridge, could you? I have too much work to do to stay in this area idling." Bai Zemin's eyes lit up as realization hit him. "When the time is right, just tell Xiao Xiao and she will relay the message to me." Xietain pointed to the little pink dolphin in Bai Zemin's arms and calmly explained, "Remember to do that a day before to give me enough time to prepare myself." "All right." Bai Zemin nodded as he unconsciously cuddled the little beast in his embrace, thus causing the pink dolphin to shrink a little before relaxing even more than before. "Then, I'll take my leave here." Xietain nodded with a smile. "I'm really glad to have met nice people like you too." "Same here," Bai Zemin said with a faint smile. "I hope we can cooperate in the future again." "We surely can," Xietain replied politely before turning and beginning to hum some tune. The sound of her humming was extremely beautiful, and the melody born from it was soft enough to put a baby to sleep in a matter of seconds. The sea creatures responded immediately and, like an army that had undergone countless years of fierce training, jumped into the sea, raising waves of varying sizes, and disappearing into the deep water not long after. "See you soon, Bai Zemin, Shangyuan Bingshu," Xietain waved goodbye once her people disappeared. She herself jumped from the wave she controlled and created a beautiful rainbow-shaped curve. The sun's rays shone over the blue scales of her tail, reflecting extremely beautiful sapphire-colored sparkles. Her hair danced in the wind softly, and like a work of art, she crashed on the surface of the sea, creating soft ripples. A moment later, the sea regained its calm. With the disappearance of the sea race and the annihilation of the zombie beast alliance, there were only 2 living beings remaining in the area, now so silent that only the sound of the wind could be heard, even though 6 hours ago it was a roaring hell where death lurked in every corner. The bridge had lost several parts, however, with the magic of Xietain, it was no longer in danger of collapsing. She had activated some skill that had raised the sea level around the bridge a little less than 200 meters. The waters had stopped just below the bridge, holding it tight and not letting it sink. The blood, corpses, fragments of broken bones, and shattered organs that had previously covered the surface of the bridge had disappeared without a trace. No one would think that a few hours earlier this very place had been held to the eyes. Xietain sighed and turned to look at the woman beside him. Bingshu, let's. His words got stuck in his throat, and he unconsciously took a step back as he looked at Xiangyun and Bingshu. What's wrong? Xietain asked somewhat apprehensively. Xiangyun and Bingshu had the glowing eyes of a predator as she looked in his direction. She truly looked like a wild beast as she took a step forward, and for a moment Xietain even went so far as to think that she was so enraged by the words of Xietain that she would finally vent the anger she had been holding back over what had happened on him. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Hand her over, she said suddenly. What? That pink dolphin. Hand her over. Xiangyun Bingshu stretched her arms forward as she said in a deep voice. She looked into Xietan's eyes and said earnestly, I will take care of her for you. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 543 Lilith's Return? That pink dolphin. Hand her over. Xiangyun Bingshu stretched her arms forward as she said in a deep voice. She looked into Xietan's eyes and said earnestly, I will take care of her for you. Xietain unconsciously pulled the little pink dolphin closer to his body, hugging the little creature tightly. The little dolphin gently wiggled in his embrace, and her slippery, soft back helped her find a position to her liking again. The eyes of Xiangyun Bingshu twinkled slightly as she watched the cute movements of the little animal in the embrace of Xietain. She, like most girls in the world, loved cute things, and added to the affection Xiangyun Bingshu had for small pet-like animals, the little pink dolphin met all her criteria for a cuddly animal, begging to be hugged. Xietain coughed to clear his throat when he finally came to his senses, and realized that he had misunderstood the reason behind the fiery gaze of the Ice Princess. But then again, this was not his fault either. After all, this was a side of Xiangyun Bingshu that Xietain didn't know about until now. He looked at the little pink dolphin that had her eyes closed, and then looked at Xiangyun Bingshu, who still held her arms outstretched forward and looked at him, as if she was asking him when he was going to hand the little animal over to her. With a resigned sigh, Xietain loosened his embrace around the little pink dolphin, and while holding onto her tiny body with both hands from the sides, began to move her towards Xiangyun Bingshu slowly. Just like in a movie when an incredible scene was about to happen, time seemed to slow down as Xiangyun Bingshu looked at the little dolphin closer and closer to her, and her eager gaze revealed that she could not wait to have the dolphin in her embrace. Possibly sensing the movement around her, or perhaps as a consequence of losing the warmth that was surrounding her, the pink dolphin named Xiao Xiao opened her eyes in slow motion and looked forward while blinking a couple of times, as if she was confused about something. Then, in that strange feeling that everything was moving in slow motion, the sky-blue eyes of Xiangyun Bingshu met the deep pink eyes of little Xiao Xiao. The hands of Xiangyun Bingshu had barely reached out to touch the body of the little pink dolphin when the animal suddenly began to go crazy. First, the little pink dolphin let out a cry that was not different from a baby's cry, and then immediately opened her mouth and splashed out a jet of cold water. Of course, with Xiangyun Bingshu standing only half a meter distant, the sudden attack of the little pink dolphin caught her off guard, and she could not avoid it in any way. Splash! The jet of cold water hit the face of Xiangyun Bingshu, creating a splashing sound identical to that of a water-filled balloon hitting the ground. The water soaked her beautiful face and forced her to close her eyes, as the aftershocks of the attack drenched all of her hair and the top of her leather armor. The sound of the transparent water droplets running down the curves of her seductive body, gently dripping onto the concrete ground, was the only thing that could be heard in conjunction with the light sound of the sea breeze. Xiangyun Bingshu slowly opened her eyes, and her gaze met the pink eyes of the little pink dolphin, who seemed to be looking at her, as if she had done something evil. The little pink dolphin let out intangible sounds similar to any other normal dolphin as she squirmed in Bai Zemin's grip. It sounded as if she was scolding Shangyuan Bingshu, or as if she was telling her not to do it again, or else she would throw another jet of cold water at her again. The little creature went so far as to puff out her soft cheeks, as if she was showing that she had more where the previous one came from. Bai Zemin looked at Shangyuan Bingshu's completely wet face, and noticing her dumbfounded look, something inside him finally burst. Ha 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 ha. For the first time since the apocalypse broke out 2 months and a week ago, Bai Zemin laughed out loud without worrying at all that it was anything other than releasing all the urge to laugh that overwhelmed him inside. While it might not be that long compared to Shangyuan Bingshu, it was true that Bai Zemin also could not remember precisely when the last time someone or something had made him laugh the way he was laughing right now. His laughter was carried away by the winds blowing from different directions, but before it could get far enough away, another new one came. The little pink dolphin squirmed in Bai Zemin's grip and let out more cute sounds as she turned her head slightly and stared at him. Weirdly, and even though he did not understand what Xiao Xiao was saying to him, Bai Zemin somehow felt that he could understand what she wanted him to do. So, he retracted his arms, and with the little pink dolphin in his hands, he hugged her close to his chest again, much to the delight of the little animal who soon closed her eyes again, as if relieved after returning home after a long and dangerous trip. Shangyuan Bingshu stared at Bai Zemin as drops of water fell down her face. She seemed to be waiting for him to stop laughing, and when he finally stopped she slowly said, "Funny?" Between laughter and tears, Bai Zemin didn't hesitate to nod with a big smile. "I'm sorry, Bingshu. But I couldn't help it. It was stronger than me." "Yes, so I see," Shangyuan Bingshu said as she nodded and looked at the little pink dolphin resentfully. "This treacherous little beast really doesn't know what's good." Shangyuan Bingshu snorted, and without giving the little dolphin another glance pointed at the pile of soul stones beside her. "What are we going to do with these?" "So you're overlooking what just happened?" Bai Zemin said with a teasing smile. "What are we going to do with these? You got mad at the little dolphin just because she splashed a jet of water in your face? What are we going to do with these? Maybe it's because the little dolphin is female and I'm male? Do you want to die?" As they chatted, mainly with Bai Zemin joking about what had happened to Shangyuan Bingshu, he waved his right hand and easily absorbed all the soul stones inside his spatial storage ring. The soul stones, despite being in the millions, were so small that they only took up 1/3 of the total space in the ring. With the remaining 2/3, Bai Zemin had no problem storing the corpses of several thousand beasts before he had no choice but to stop. After filling his ring to the brim, Bai Zemin walked towards Shangyuan Bingshu and took off his ring as he said, "Bingshu, I will give you my storage ring to carry these things to the base. Leave 1 million soul stones in the ring, and the rest leave it in the vault. As for the beast corpses, take them all." "All right, I'll be back as soon as I can." Shangyuan Bingshu nodded calmly, now completely dry. Despite what had happened, Shangyuan Bingshu occasionally stole glances at the little pink dolphin. Her blue eyes shone with tenderness but at the same time with hatred, complex emotions that battled in her heart. Bai Zemin tried his best to restrain the urge to laugh again, as it was really funny to see the proud and arrogant Shangyuan Bingshu being scolded by a small dolphin, less than half a meter long, that was not unlike a baby. He cut the blood connection with his storage ring and handed it to Shangyuan Bingshu, explaining how it worked. Then, she nodded without saying a word, and after giving one last glance at the little pink dolphin sleeping in his arms, she turned into a silver shadow that disappeared in a southerly direction seconds later. Once Shangyuan Bingshu left to free up space in the storage ring, Bai Zemin lifted the little pink dolphin to the level of his face to take a closer look. The little dolphin Xiao Xiao seemed to notice something, and slowly opened her 2 beautiful eyes. The little creature blinked a couple of times and looked around as if searching for someone, but finding no one she nodded, as if satisfied with something before looking back at Bai Zemin with her clear eyes. Bai Zemin didn't know whether to laugh or cry seeing the attitude of the little beast in his arms. "Xiao Xiao, could it be that you don't like Bingshu?" Pupu Xiao Xiao made some cute but incomprehensible sounds in reply to Bai Zemin's question. No, it's not Ling Long v Samsara Online's readers understand it. She is a good person. Besides, she likes you a lot. Pupu, what do you mean, you don't like humans? Poo, I'm human too, you know. Pupu, excuse me? The craziest scene of all unfolded on top of the bridge that a few hours ago had been the battlefield chosen to fight one of the fiercest wars with 4 races as participants. A human and a little pink dolphin casually chatted while the sun was slowly rising and the temperature was climbing. In the end, Bai Zemin could find no response from Xiao Xiao. It seemed that the little animal simply did not like the idea of being hugged by Shangyun Bingshu, as strange as it seemed, but she did not seem to have a problem with Bai Zemin. In fact, Xiao Xiao was comfortable enough in his embrace to sleep like a baby. Although the little pink dolphin did not like the idea of being hugged by others, it was clear that Xiao Xiao was smart enough to not hurt Shangyun Bingshu. After all, Xiao Xiao was, at the end of the day, a second-order existence. Regardless of whether she was not a creature fully focused on combat, her strength was more than enough to crush the head of Shangyun Bingshu, considering the distance and how sudden the surprise attack had been. By the way, don't you need water or something? Bai Zemin asked as he sat on the edge of the bridge and swung his legs freely. The little Xiao Xiao in his embrace looked away as she rested on his lap and let out a series of low sounds for a couple of seconds in reply. She seemed quite agitated for some reason. Sorry about that, friend, no offense. Bai Zemin apologized as he sensed that Xiao Xiao seemed to feel offended, as if someone had touched her pride. Xiao Xiao accepted the apology from Bai Zemin easily, and the two continued chatting casually. Bai Zemin understood the reason why the mermaid princess had told him earlier that the most remarkable ability of Xiao Xiao was communication. This little pink dolphin seemed to be able to understand human speech and even had the ability to imply her intention through those strange sounds she made when she spoke. Suddenly, Bai Zemin felt that he had discovered something, but before he could investigate further about it, that flash of inspiration disappeared. He frowned as he somehow felt that what he had lost was so important that if he didn't remember it soon, he would probably regret it for a long time. However, despite thinking deeply about it for more than half an hour, he failed to figure out what it was that had slipped his mind. Bang! Suddenly, the ocean water exploded as a huge swordfish over 10 meters long and almost 3 meters high jumped mightily. Its bright eyes were focused on Bai Zemin, as if it was watching a good meal, and the teeth inside its mouth reflected danger under the rays of the sun. Bai Zemin noticed that the swordfish was a first-order beast and was about to casually kill it, but suddenly, he felt Xiao Xiao stirring in his lap. Before he could even look down, a huge jet of water flew out of his lap area and struck the approaching swordfish in mid-flight. Boom! The body of the swordfish exploded into a mist of blood, and fragments of broken organs fell noisily into the water, staining the surface with a light blue that was soon washed away by the churning waves. A small rainbow formed in the sky as the sun pierced the water particles floating in the air, and silence once again reigned supreme over the area. The first-order swordfish didn't even have time or the opportunity to cry out in pain, or much less demonstrate its might before it turned into a pile of meat paste under the seemingly casual attack of the little pink dolphin. A second-order existence is a second-order existence no matter what. Bai Zemin patted Xiao Xiao while in his heart he sighed for Shangyun Bingshu. Fortunately, and the little dolphin was smarter otherwise. Just as he was thinking of the possible consequences of what might have been, a familiar rose scent that he hadn't felt in over a month assaulted his nostrils, being swept away by the strong breeze of the wind in an instant, as if it had never been there in the first place. Bai Zemin froze for a moment before shaking his head and smiling bitterly in his heart, feeling that it was just an illusion of his mind. Then, a slightly mocking voice sounded from behind him. It's been a month since I left and I expected to see something amazing at our reunion, but I didn't expect to see such a powerful spurt from your crotch as welcome. Little brother Zemin, did you miss this big sister so much? Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 544 Lilith vs Shangyun Bingshu, Part 1. How would you feel if the first thing you saw after seeing a person you longed to see so much was casually chatting with a strange pink dolphin? You probably couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. After staying in the castle of Lucifer in Cram World for 2 days, Lilith found a way to use space magic and sneak out without anyone noticing her. Probably by the time the Lord of the Demonic Army or any other higher existence noticed her missing, she would surely have reached her goal, and with Earth being a planet full of mysteries and irregularities that for some strange reason was out of reach of the higher existences, Lilith did not need to fear being found. After arriving on Earth and reaching China, Lilith immediately felt the aura she was looking for. It was just that it was hard for her to believe that this aura belonged to the same Bai Zemin that she had not seen for a little over a month. When she arrived at the location of the bridge, instead of immediately approaching Bai Zemin, Lilith floated in the distance as she watched him from afar with complicated eyes. She could still remember how a little over 30 days ago, Xietain was a first-order existence that could barely kill second-order existences by launching his most powerful attack, taking his enemies by surprise. She could still remember the death of two second-order existences after being hit by the Crimson Blood Judgment of Xietain as they both fought each other, and another second-order existence, which ended up being wounded by the said magic attack. Therefore, after hearing all the impressive things he had accomplished in Oblong World, she found it hard to believe, even though she knew that everything she heard was the truth. However, Lilith did not expect that when she came back to see Xietain a month after leaving Earth, what she would find would be an existence whose soul power was so brilliant as that of any other second-order existence, despite being only a first-order existence. In fact, Lilith could faintly tell just from the aura surrounding Xietain that a third-order existence would possibly succumb before him if he was fully unleashed. The ruby-colored eyes of Lilith shone like flashlights in the middle of the night, even though the sky was clear. In her gaze, she could see the soul of Xietain, so powerful and terrifying that even she feared for what he would end up turning into in the seemingly not-so-distant future. What kind of things had he experienced during this short time? Why had his strength taken such a terrifying leap in such a short time? How many times had his life been in danger of ending? How strong were the winds that the flame of his soul had to endure to avoid being extinguished? Lilith could not stop her eyes from softening, and a tender look appeared on her face as she stared at the young human that was innocently kicking at the edge of the bridge. What was Xietain like before the soul record forced him to change? What was he like before the apocalypse? For the first time, Lilith pondered such questions. She wished she could meet him before every single being went to hell, but she knew that such a wish was an impossible one. A wish that would not be fulfilled in this life or any other. And to think that I, a higher existence honored by hundreds of thousands, feared by countless, the one who received the title of Bloody Succubus, would actually be apprehensive and worried about what to say in the presence of a first-order male. Lilith could not help but smile bitterly as she secretly thought such a thing. Just when she was having difficulties about how to approach Xietain or announce her arrival for fear of meeting someone completely different from the one she knew a month ago, a considerably sized swordfish broke through the sea and jumped towards the bridge with its mouth wide open. When the small pink dolphin spewed out a huge jet of water that did not match in any way with her size, and the first-order swordfish's body was turned into a bloody mess, Lilith wondered at what point Xietain had befriended a strange second-order sea creature. However, she decided that this was a golden opportunity for her to make her appearance. After all, what better way to break the ice than a slightly naughty joke that perfectly suited the way she had always teased Xietain before leaving to Kremworld? Since from the back it really did look like the giant water jet was shot out of Xietan's crotch, the words she would say next naturally came to Lilith's mind. It's been a month since I left and I expected to see something amazing at our reunion, but I didn't expect to see such a powerful spurt from your crotch as welcome. Little brother Xietain, did you miss this big sister so much? Nervous and anxiously waiting for the response she would receive, Lilith noticed how Xietan's body froze when he heard her voice. Although he had yet to see her, the voice of Lilith and her natural essence was something that Xietain would probably have difficulty to forget in his entire life, no matter how many years might pass. For him, Lilith was by far the existence that had left the biggest impact on his life. Surely he could never forget this little succubus who loved to make naughty jokes and tease him sexually whenever the opportunity arose. Without turning around yet, as if afraid that this was all a dirty trick played by his anxious and craving mind, Xietain slowly stood up with his hands in front of his body. Little Xiao Xiao in his embrace naturally felt the abrupt change in the settled emotions of Xietain. The little pink dolphin did not struggle, even though her body was being squeezed tightly without Xietain, noticing as she could feel his erratic heart pounding hard against his chest. The sun was high in the sky, and a beautiful rainbow accompanied the gorgeous cloudless blue sky. The choppy waters were now calm, and the sea breeze carried a scent of purity and freshness that helped to calm the anxiety. However, the anxiety Xietain felt at this moment was on another level. He, who had technically slaughtered enough to annihilate 1/7 of mankind, feared that after turning around what would greet him would be an empty bridge. But it wasn't as if he could stand there forever, or could he? Gathering courage and without much expectation, even though the scent of roses that flooded his senses felt as real as the softness of the little dolphin's body in his embrace, Xietain slowly turned to face reality. Red eyes that sparkled like two enchanting rubies under the sun's glare, a tantalizing body capable of taking the breath away from any sentient being, carefully wrapped by a midnight black dress that hugged every curve and highlighted every detail of it, a face as innocent as that of a young girl who had not seen the impurities of the world, legs as shiny as ivory that seemed to taunt every time the sea breeze stopped blowing and hid again under the dress that almost touched the ground, red lips as hot as fire, and a smile that, despite looking playful, could not hide the tension she felt. No matter how much time passed, it was impossible for Xietain to forget even the smallest detail about her. The woman standing a few feet away was by far the brightest existence, so much so that there was no darkness that could hide her forever, as memories would always resurface. There were so many things he wanted to tell her when they met again. There were so many jokes that Xietain had carefully planned before going to sleep every night for the entire month they spent away from each other to leave her speechless. What kind of face would she make once she knew about his current strength? What kind of reaction would she show when she found out how great and numerous were the feats he had managed to complete during the time she was not present? Xietain had even planned to act as if he was angry at her sudden disappearance, without even having given him time to say goodbye. However, planning was just that, planning. Reality was completely different and was always open to change. When emotions took over, no matter how brief the moment, plans were bound to change. Therefore, the mind of Xietain went blank when his black eyes met again with that beautiful pair of sparkling rubies. Lilith was not much different. She felt with utter clarity how her own heart was beating so hard inside her chest that she even wondered how it was possible for her heart to beat like that after being practically dead for so many years. Lilith felt so nervous and apprehensive that despite her experience, she didn't know what to say. She was so lost on how to react when she met the face that it even appeared in her mind every time she blinked that she couldn't even notice how the heart of Xietain was fluttering. Maybe due to the situation they were in, neither Lilith nor Xietain himself noticed how in his soul, that rune with the engraving of a heart wrapped by a stone armor, was cracking in such a way that it seemed to be hanging by a thread and made one wonder how long such a thread could endure before collapsing. Time passed, but even after staring at each other for more than a minute, neither of them said a single word. They simply looked into the eyes of the other, perhaps trying to study each other's reaction, or perhaps trying to firmly imprint the opposite's appearance deep in their souls. In fact, Lilith was so tense and unsteady that she couldn't even bother to hide her presence from the little pink dolphin. Little Xiao Xiao's gaze went back and forth between Xietan's and Lilith's faces in confusion. Even though she was a spirit dolphin and could feel more about the souls of others, Xiao Xiao was actually a rather young dolphin, and things like feelings were too complex for her yet. After a long time and despite still feeling anxious, Xietain at least managed to calm down enough to say something. "Hey, it's been a while." Far from what he had planned to say or do, all he managed to utter were words that despite being simple actually hid longing which Lilith noticed despite not being able to comprehend how hard the short month they had been apart was for Xietain. Lilith forced a smile that was a bit bittersweet and said softly, You've become really strong now." Xietain looked into her eyes as hundreds of thousands of memories flashed through his head in a matter of an instant. "A lot of things happened after you left," he said with a smile not very different than Lilith's. His voice sounded somewhat tired after so many wars his body and soul had gone through as he sighed. "The number of things that happened during this short period of time made it seem longer than ever. It will probably be hard for you to believe how many things have changed." "I bet it was, I'm sure it was." Lilith nodded without doubting his word. She didn't say that she knew about Oblong World, as she expected him to tell her in detail, even if it took a whole day. Regardless of the reasons, regardless of how they felt now, Lilith knew it was inevitable that some of that special connection they had would be lost. After all, she had been away during crucial times for him. Xietan's evolution had begun just over 2 months ago, and she had been absent for the last half. It was very likely that during that time someone else may have taken the place she did. "It will probably take more than..." Xietan's words got stuck in his throat as a wave of exhaustion suddenly hit him hard. His eyes got cloudy and his body staggered. The whole world seemed to spin around a million times in a second, and before he realized what was wrong, his legs lost their strength, and he fell to the ground. Lilith's face changed abruptly when she saw Xietain fall. Her heart clenched as if a pair of divine chains wrapped around it, and with anxiety coursing through her veins, she blinked at his side, even though she was at a close enough distance to be able to close it with a step. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 545 Lilith vs Xietain Bingshu, Part 2/3. At the speed of light, Lilith reached Xietan's body before his head hit the ground. She hurriedly held him and with the highest level of gentleness, placed him on his back to allow his body to rest in an upright position. Little Xiao Xiao immediately became a little frenetic as Bai Zemin fell unconscious. This little pink dolphin seemed to really like the human she had just met, as she not only began to squeal noisily like a baby crying at the lack of her closest relative, but also began to move in Bai Zemin's unconscious embrace to reach his face and look him in the face with big eyes brimming with worry. Lilith temporarily ignored the little pink animal, as all her attention was focused solely and exclusively on the young man who had just lost his consciousness. She frowned, and the first thing she did was to make sure that Bai Zemin's pulse was stable, something she confirmed in a second, and was relieved that his heartbeat was as powerful as that of a wild bull. Although Lilith was a sixth-order existence, she was somewhat useless when it came to healing or alleviating negative status effects, as her skills were mainly focused more on mass control, be it physical, magical, or spiritual. But even if she could do anything about it unless she wanted to receive the punishment of the soul record for breaking the rules, she couldn't do much about it either. The only thing that relieved Lilith tremendously was the fact that except for the slightly labored breathing and sweat running down his face, Bai Zemin did not show any strange signs that were in any way indicative of harm to his well-being. This little scoundrel probably forced himself again, Lilith whispered softly as she stroked Bai Zemin's face with one hand. She reached so far as to slightly cool the breeze blowing from the 4 cardinal directions to help Bai Zemin's high body temperature fall within normal parameters. Even without having been by his side, Lilith could clearly figure out what had probably happened. Considering that she was fully aware of the large number of zombies on the bridge between the 2 districts, and considering that in the past Bai Zemin had chatted with her about what to do with the 20 million zombies that were likely to congregate there due to the 2 large cities north and south of the bridge, it was more than clear that he had pushed himself harder than he should have in order to wipe them all out as quickly as possible. Moreover, considering the rather miserable condition of the bridge, Lilith could accurately judge that the battle that had been fought here had probably been a lot more challenging than Bai Zemin thought it would be when he arrived for the first time. Otherwise, it would be impossible for 20 million unclassified zombies to force an existence capable of facing third-order existences like him into this miserable state. Lilith's gaze was lost on Bai Zemin's face, and even she didn't know how to feel about it, as dozens of thoughts flashed through her mind. Bai Zemin was undoubtedly handsome, but Lilith had seen higher existences like Lucifer, Medes, Nicolai, etc., existences that basically represented the peak of perfection in the universe, as far as appearance was concerned. Therefore, it was obvious that even though she was staring at his face as if she was in a trance, what was keeping her in that state of hypnosis was something else. This little scoundrel really is dangerous to any woman. Lilith sighed as she caressed his face. Bai Zemin's personality was like a magic drug. Once discovered, no woman would be able to let him go. To women who didn't know his personality too well, he could be just a tremendously handsome but tyrannical and selfish young man. But to those women who fought at his side and knew his true self after spending hours upon hours beside him, Bai Zemin's personality was no different than nectar for the bees. Even Lilith noticed that she was slowly starting to fall. But the most ironic thing of all was that despite being aware of this fact, one would expect her to be able to avoid falling. Now that she knew nothing could be further from the truth, despite knowing this, Lilith could do nothing about it. No, it wasn't that she couldn't do anything about it, rather it was that, "I don't even have the will or the courage to refuse to let such a thing happen," Lilith muttered, not knowing whether she should laugh or cry. Suddenly, Lilith felt an extremely familiar aura approaching her from the distance, and approaching swiftly in the direction of the bridge. The speed of the owner of that aura was high enough to close the distance that currently separated them in the next few seconds. After a few moments of consideration, Lilith slowly stood up and walked a couple of steps forward. She stood in such a way that Bai Zemin's unconscious body was behind her, as she looked in a southern direction with a faint smile, but indifferent eyes. "I guess it's better to say hello now to avoid awkwardness later." Her voice was carried away by the wind and swallowed up by the distance. Instead of hiding her presence, she made herself known for anyone to see. Approximately 10 seconds later, the person Lilith was waiting for finally appeared within her line of sight, and since the bridge was a perfect straight line without any large structures or obstacles, that person also noticed Lilith soon after, having approached a few more kilometers that were closed in a matter of 2 or 3 blinks of an eye. This person was none other than Xietain Bingshu, who after making some fast work after teaming up with Wu Yijin and Nangong Lingxin, had managed to secure over 1,600,000 soul stones in the basement of the mansion currently occupied by Bai Zemin. She'd even arranged for several teams to be in charge of moving the corpses of the slain beasts, that after being struck by infinite reductions lightning, again regained their colossal size. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for so many corpses to fall into the spatial storage ring, despite having quite a considerable size inside. After organizing everything and giving Wu Yijin a brief explanation of what was taking place, Shangyun Bingshu hurriedly left the base to head south at full speed. Like everyone else, Shangyun Bingshu was very clear that the sooner she finished her job, the sooner Bai Zemin could return to the base to get the rest he definitely deserved after all he had done. But little did she expect that after approaching to the central area of the bridge where Bai Zemin said he would wait for her, what awaited Shangyun Bingshu was the sight of a woman so beautiful that even someone proud like her, who had been praised as the most beautiful woman on countless occasions, was forced to admit her own inferiority. Shangyun Bingshu subconsciously stopped her steps when she was 50 meters away, and for a moment was stunned looking at the lady in front of her. However, there was not much she had to look at to realize that regardless of whether it was figure, appearance, demeanor, or charm, etc., Shangyun Bingshu could not hold a candle before the black-haired woman. Even the natural coldness that Shangyun Bingshu had formed in her character throughout her life was incomparable to the chilling coldness that appeared and disappeared in the woman's red eyes in front of her, like a snake hiding waiting for the moment to strike at its prey. "Who are you?" Shangyun Bingshu asked as she reached for her sword from the scabbard at her waist. She frowned tightly as she noticed Bai Zemin lying unconscious behind the unknown woman. Although she felt relieved internally as she could tell that Bai Zemin seemed to be out of danger and did not even appear to be injured, Shangyun Bingshu did not understand the current situation. It had only been approximately 50 to 60 minutes since she had left for the base and returned, but for some reason, the mighty Bai Zemin was now passed out on the ground, and a woman she had never seen in her life was standing beside him. Lilith stared at Shangyun Bingshu for a couple of seconds, and her eyes flashed peculiarly. Her red lips pursed into a beautiful smile that contained a hint of mockery as she slowly said, as arrogant as ever, "Eh? I'm pretty sure your education should be good enough to know that before you ask someone's identity, you should first introduce yourself." As arrogant as ever? Shangyun Bingshu frowned and a flash of confusion shone in her blue eyes. "Do you know me? You ask if do I know you?" Lilith actually looked surprised at Shangyun Bingshu's question. It was as if among all the simulated conversations she had expected to have, such a question never existed. She chuckled and shook her head before slowly saying, "Let's just say I know you. Since you are indeed still an arrogant brat, Shangyun Bingshu, let me introduce myself first." Shangyun Bingshu's expression changed slightly as she realized that the woman 50 meters ahead of her seemed to know more than just her name. However, she didn't have too much time to be surprised when the next words from the said woman forcefully shook her core. "My name is Lilith. Let's just say I'm something like the wife of the little scoundrel behind me, and now I'm taking care of him. As for my power scale," Lilith looked at Shangyun Bingshu with a scornful smile, and said coldly, "Well, let's leave it at that even if you were 100 times stronger than your current one, you still couldn't do anything against me." Shangyun Bingshu did not seem to hear Lilith's last sentence at all, as her brain somehow froze somewhere in the first part. She looked at the woman who introduced herself as Lilith and said with disbelieving eyes, What did you say? I said my name is Lilith." Shangyun Bingshu unsheathed her sword as a wave of irritation began to rise in her heart. She didn't understand why, she just knew and felt that just like a bull seeing something red, the more she looked at the woman in front of her, the more Shangyun Bingshu became angry. "I don't care about your name, dare to repeat what you said after that." Shangyun Bingshu's beautiful voice slowly became tinged with chilling coldness, capable of freezing one's bones. I said that regarding my power scale, even if you were 100 times stronger than your current one, you still couldn't do anything against me." Lilith smiled derisively as she looked at Shangyun Bingshu with disdain. "This bitch, she clearly knows what I mean, but she keeps taunting me." Shangyun Bingshu gritted her teeth and muttered in such a low voice that it was even hard to hear her own. Then, she looked at Lilith in a way that even spirits could be scared, but all she got in return was the same smile that she was slowly beginning to hate more and more. As if all sense of intelligence had left her, Shangyun Bingshu turned into a creature that was only guided by her instinct, and with a mighty stomp, her body disappeared from its previous position, closing the 50-meter distance that separated her from Lilith in an instant. Shangyun Bingshu was undoubtedly fast, not only because of all the pure soul power she had absorbed after defeating enemies above her league, but also because she had invested half of her gained status points in agility. With almost 600 points of agility, 50 meters of distance was nothing in his eyes. It was just that in Lilith's eyes, Shangyun Bingshu was not much different from a turtle. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 546 Lilith vs Shangyun Bingshu, Part 3/3. This bitch, she clearly knows what I mean, but she keeps taunting me. When Lilith heard the low murmur from Shangyun Bingshu, she couldn't help but raise an eyebrow slightly in surprise. Although the silver-haired beauty's voice had been low enough to go unnoticed, it was impossible for it to slip past the senses of an existence at Lilith's level. It was just that even Lilith herself doubted her ears for the first time, as she somehow could not believe that this Shangyun Bingshu was cursing so casually. Maybe her personality is different from what she shows in public? Maybe Shangyun Bingshu's personality is different from what Lilith thought? Or could it be that this is the real personality of the existence known as Shangyun Bingshu when she... A thought popped into Lilith's head and quickly took root, causing a complicated look to flash in her eyes. From the very beginning, what Lilith had been trying to do by teasing Shangyun Bingshu in such ways was to try to get clues about how far the relationship between the Ice Princess and Bai Zemin had gone. After all, Lilith clearly remembered how that night when she told Bai Zemin about the existence of the firmament fragments, she also warned him about his attitude towards women. She even told him that his show of care and special kindness could be misunderstood, which in the future could give him a lot of problems. However, since at the time of her departure, both Bai Zemin and Shangyun Bingshu had grown considerably closer, Lilith did not believe that more than a month later, the relationship between them would not become even closer. After all, Shangyun Bingshu was possibly the only existence capable of actually helping Bai Zemin. Even Lilith could not compare in this aspect, since all she could do was give him information, unlike Shangyun Bingshu, who could fight side by side with him. I didn't expect things to turn out like this in such a short time. Lilith didn't know how to feel as she watched Shangyun Bingshu drawing her sword and rushing towards her, glaring at her like an enraged lioness. It's all that little shameless man's fault. Lilith clenched her teeth secretly as she raised her left hand calmly. In the ruby-colored eyes of the charming succubus, the silver radiance of Shangyun Bingshu's sword covered by some kind of skill was reflected. It was as if the world was slowing down for her, but in reality, it was just that Lilith was moving too fast compared to the laws of the earth, let alone compared to Shangyun Bingshu. Boom! An explosion of frost covered the area in fog as the sword of Shangyun Bingshu met Lilith's hand. The temperature of the area immediately plummeted, and the entire width of the bridge for 500 meters long obtained a thin layer of ice on the surface. It was only when the frozen air particles reflected in the eyes of Shangyun Bingshu under the glare of the sun that she realized what she had just done, and was immediately hit by a wave of guilt. What did I just do? Shangyun Bingshu whispered with her eyes wide open. Her entire body shuddered in fear as she took 2 steps back, realizing that she had lost her sanity for a moment and attacked a living being who, despite taunting her, had not committed any crime worthy of the death penalty. Shangyun Bingshu was immediately overcome with regret. She naturally did not believe that a woman who appeared casually would have the strength she claimed to have. Shangyun Bingshu knew better than anyone how powerful she was and how lethal her attacks were. Even a second-order peak beast would be cut into 2 pieces if it did not fight back, let alone the frail body of a human woman. Soon, however, Shangyun Bingshu realized that her regret was unnecessary, and that perhaps the one she should be worrying about was herself instead of others. That from now was frost rebuff in conjunction with a bit of blizzard? You really do grow up fast. As expected, I guess I should say. Lilith's slightly lazy voice reached Shangyun Bingshu, and out of pure instinct, she leaped back as she raised her sword in a defensive stance. Swoosh! The blue eyes of Shangyun Bingshu widened as shock knocked her. Under her disbelieving gaze, the frost fog was swept away by forces outside of nature, and what was hidden within was immediately revealed. Standing there, Lilith had her left hand extended forward at shoulder height. Her index finger pointed upward, and her red eyes were looking appreciatively at her. Shangyun Bingshu's natural sense of danger was triggered as never before when the realization of what had actually happened during that brief second came upon her. This woman had stopped her physical attack powered by 2 magic skills just by using 1 finger? When this question was born inside Shangyun Bingshu's head, the very brain that gave birth to such a thought refused to believe it. Shangyun Bingshu was 100% sure that even Bai Zemin could not take that attack of before with his bare hands so casually, and refused to believe that someone more abnormal than him would appear in China. Perhaps out of instinct or perhaps feeling overwhelmed and embarrassed, Shangyun Bingshu pointed her sword towards the sky and called out, "Ice swords!" Her angelic voice was not different from the song of a seraphim, and surrounded by the sea, as the sunlight hovered over her, made her look like a true goddess who had descended upon the world to eradicate evil. Lilith felt the mana inside Shangyuan Bingshu's body stir, and her magical power exploded into the sky. Forget it, it's pointless. Lilith shook her head as she watched tens and then hundreds of silver transparent swords taking form in the sky. Go. Shangyuan Bingshu ignored Lilith's words and swung down her sword fiercely as she gave the verbal command. However, something Shangyuan Bingshu did not expect happened. I told you it's pointless. Lilith looked at Shangyuan Bingshu with indifferent eyes and said in a cold voice, don't you ever listen to the words of others? At the end of the day, you are still an arrogant brat who, after gaining some strength, thinks she can do as she pleases. Shangyuan Bingshu looked up to the sky in disbelief, and her eyes twitched due to the shock. The eye swords that she had invested over 90+ mana points into, far from obeying her previous command, were no longer even pointing towards the enemy. They were now pointing towards the ground directly over the position she was standing on. Her magic attack was stolen and was now being used against her. Shangyuan Bingshu lowered her gaze from the sky and looked at Lilith in shock and disbelief. What kind of force was this? It was completely beyond anything Shangyuan Bingshu could comprehend. But the strangest thing of all was that, unlike the fear she felt when the emperor of the Asura race appeared before her and Bai Zemin in Oblong World, Shangyuan Bingshu could not feel the slightest danger or fear towards the woman who called herself Lilith. Seeing that Shangyuan Bingshu was looking at her with surprise, but there was no fear in her eyes, Lilith could not help but feel a little upset. Therefore, she decided that scaring this woman a little to make her be more cautious from now on would not be a bad step to take. Since you attack first, I can now attack with complete freedom. Lilith's cold voice resounded as if it was the only truth in the universe. The entire world fell silent, and the warm winds blowing in the sea stopped flowing as if the reality had frozen. Bang, 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 bang. Plant skill? Shangyuan Bingshu muttered as suddenly hundreds and soon thousands of sea plants broke out of the sea and jumped onto the bridge. These aquatic plants were clearly beings without intelligence, as the magic power around them did not belong to them. Shangyuan Bingshu was certain of this fact, because if that terrifying magic power was from the aquatic plants, then they would probably be the rulers of the sea with ease. As Shangyuan Bingshu watched as half of the aquatic plants stood behind Lilith, several tens of the ones behind her soon made their move. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Dozens of plants used whip-like limbs and slashed towards Shangyuan Bingshu, to which she immediately responded by slashing with her sword at lightning speed. Clang, 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 clang. To further increase Shangyuan Bingshu's shock, those weak-looking plants were actually covered in layers of mana that had transformed their bodies into creatures terrifying enough to completely ignore the edge of her sword. All she could do was fight futilely and drain more and more stamina and mana, relying solely on her spectacular sword skill to keep her afloat. Then, Shangyuan Bingshu realized that before she realized when, her body had been forced back so far that she could now feel a hand right behind her neck. You see? No matter how hard you try, the current you single-handedly is capable of this much. Lilith's voice was lazy and slightly derisive. Shangyuan Bingshu lowered her sword and did not panic. She didn't look back or make another move as she said coldly, even if I can't beat you now, I definitely will in the future. Oh? Lilith raised an eyebrow and her lips curved slightly upwards. That confidence of yours is even higher than my confidence when I started to evolve. Lilith could feel how high Shangyuan Bingshu's pride was. The pride of the woman whose life was in her hands was so high that only those who had never in their lives known defeat after experiencing countless battles for centuries, millennia, and even millions of years possessed. But Lilith's voice turned slightly cold, and the murderous intent she released was enough to make Shangyuan Bingshu's legs waver for a brief moment. What makes you think you'll get out of here alive after you attack me? Call it instinct or whatever you want, I know you won't kill me no matter what. Shangyuan Bingshu replied calmly. She did not feel nervous at all despite the situation she was in. Smiling teasingly, she said indifferently, if you hurt me, I wonder how you will explain that to Bai Zemin when he wakes up. Lilith was a bit tongue-tied at Shangyuan Bingshu's shamelessness. You know you're quite shameless. Where's all that pride from before? If you want to blame someone, then blame that little bastard lying on the ground behind you. Shangyuan Bingshu snorted, and for some reason, her voice sounded irritated now that she was talking about Bai Zemin. He always says that the real winner is the one who survives, regardless of what needs to be done. Besides, 10 years is not too late for a maiden to have her revenge. I will definitely make you pay for this humiliation today, Lilith. Or maybe I should call you Lily? Lilith's red eyes widened slightly, and a flash of surprise shone in her gaze. She let go of Shangyun Bingshu and subconsciously asked, "How do you know?" Shangyun Bingshu turned around to look at her face, noticing that they were both the same height. In response to Lilith, she snorted again and sneered, "Even if we put aside the weird similarity in both names, from the beginning, it has always seemed suspicious to me how it is possible for Bai Zemin to trust in an unknown woman so much. But now many things are starting to make sense to me." Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 547. Trying to understand her own heart and lips touch as soft as a caress. Shangyun Bingshu always felt that the relationship between Bai Zemin and Lily was too strange. Even the way the two of them met was too weird, to begin with. Not long after escaping from the university campus, Bai Zemin claimed to have found Lily locked in the storage of the first big hotel they used as a temporary base, before attacking the camp, led by the 4 big bosses, a camp which would later be conquered under the absolute power of Bai Zemin, and with the help of Zhongde, taking the name of Beginning Village immediately thereafter. At that time, neither Shangyun Bingshu nor anyone else gave too much importance to this woman who had come out of nowhere. Even if Bai Zemin had strangely decided to make her his right hand, and even gave her so much importance as to ask for her opinion before taking an action, he was not particularly close to anyone except Fu Shuifeng, Kang Lan, Kai Jinji, and Zhongde, so he did not draw too much attention to them. But as time went on, things changed, and as Shangyun Bingshu and the others began to get to know the personality of Bai Zemin better, the flaws in the then casual explanation he had given, and the inconsistencies began to become too obvious to go unnoticed. There were many theories regarding Lily and Bai Zemin that went back and forth between the army of modern weaponry and the army of soul evolvers. Some said that Lily was actually a woman whom Bai Zemin had loved since even before the apocalypse, and that the reason he chose to move specifically in that direction was to find her. Others said that Lily was actually a seductive woman with amazing abilities in bed who had charmed the leader, while others thought that Bai Zemin and she had fallen in love at first sight, but had yet to make anything concrete, so they simply did not say anything to the masses. However, since that was the private life of Bai Zemin, no one dared to go and question it. Even Shangyun Bingshu, despite her curiosity, did not think it would be proper to interfere too much in the business of other people's hearts. "But who are you?" Shangyun Bingshu looked at Lilith with surprise in her bright eyes. "Even for me being a woman, it's hard for me to take my eyes off you despite being completely straight. That's definitely not normal." "Oh? You're completely straight?" Lilith suddenly smiled like a cute little fox. As if she had been waiting for this opportunity, she looked at Shangyun Bingshu with narrowed eyes and slowly said, "How can you be so sure of that? Are you sexually attracted to any man? Maybe you secretly gaze at males? Or could it be that you are actually in love with a man?" The expression on Shangyun Bingshu's face changed slightly for a brief moment before her characteristic indifferent expression returned to her face. She looked at Lilith coldly and snorted, "That's none of your business, right?" Lilith chuckled before doing something that surprised Shangyun Bingshu. Lilith turned around and walked around Bai Zemin. Then, she slowly knelt on the ground and bent her body, so that her face aligned perfectly with Bai Zemin's face. Lilith's eyes automatically became soft as she stared at his face. Her inky black hair fell delicately to the side, and partially covered part of her lovely face. "What are you doing?" Shangyun Bingshu subconsciously took a step forward and reached out a hand to cling tightly to Lilith's shoulder. If Lilith was not a powerful existence, her shoulder definitely could have been dislocated and her bones converted into dust, because Shangyun Bingshu did not hesitate to use every point of her strength stat in an instinctive attempt to stop her. Lilith did not move or change her position. She simply glanced sideways at Shangyun Bingshu and said as if it was natural, "Of course, I'm going to kiss the man I like. Any problem?" What? Shangyun Bingshu's eyes widened slightly as a flash of astonishment shone in them. She looked at Lilith in disbelief and said in a low voice, You are a shameless woman." "Shameless? What would I have to be ashamed of? You mean that admitting my feelings openly is wrong? Should I then hide them or lie to myself and deny them?" Lilith shook her head while muttering those words not only to the beautiful silver-haired woman who was looking at her in increasing shock, but also to herself. The words of Lilith were really a great shock to Shangyun Bingshu. She, who had been focused solely on surviving another day and helping Bai Zemin to open a safe path in the southern direction for the sake of finding her mother, had inadvertently been negating or postponing things that should not be ignored. However, Shangyun Bingshu had always been alone. Over the years, while there were countless men of all kinds of ethnicities and with great backgrounds that tried to woo her, Shangyun Bingshu disdained those feelings because to her all anyone looked at was her exterior, but no one ever bothered to try to look beyond what the eyes could see. Things like love or any other close feelings were not only too distant for Shangyun Bingshu, but because of the things she had seen and heard throughout her life made her doubt the existence of such emotions. However, she was not naive enough to deny certain things. For example, Bai Zemin was her friend, but so was Chen He, the latter even during so many years that Bai Zemin had no way to compare with his 2 months since he and Shangyun Bingshu met. But even then, Shangyun Bingshu felt that Bai Zemin's importance in her heart was above Chen He's importance to her. It was strange, but it was also proof that it was not time that empowered the importance of a person to another, but the lived experiences and similarities between the two sides were. Regardless of everything, Shangyun Bingshu never and not even for a second considered herself to be in love with Bai Zemin, much less considering that Wu Yijin, her best friend and almost a sister to her, was head over heels in love with him. But now, with the words of Lilith still hanging in the air, Shangyun Bingshu couldn't help but think that perhaps she did feel slightly attracted to him, not love, just attraction of some sort. If this was true, then many of the unusual behaviors she had been having lately would have an explanation. For example, 2 days ago, when that strange phenomenon darkened the skies over China and possibly the entire world, just before Bai Zemin speculated about the possible evolution of the Earth, Shangyun Bingshu could still remember how disturbed she felt when he caressed Wu Yijin's hair and looked at her with kind eyes. Jealousy? When such a word popped into her head, Shangyun Bingshu was startled, and her face turned sickly pale. Was she jealous that Bai Zemin was affectionate with Wu Yijin? No, such a thing made no sense. Shangyun Bingshu denied such a thing. She refused to believe that she wouldn't want to see her good sister happy, even if she was beaten to death right here. But then, what was going on here? Was what she felt for Bai Zemin sexual attraction? Shangyun Bingshu was not so sure. She had never been physically attracted to any man or woman, so she did not know what such a feeling was like. While Shangyun Bingshu was having existential problems and for the first time trying to understand her own heart, Lilith was also having her own existential problems. She watched from above carefully at the face of the man less than 10 centimeters below. Every detail of his face was reflected in her pupils almost as red as blood itself. With dreamy eyes like those of a hypnotized woman, Lilith slowly closed the distance between them. Her black hair was so long that much of it trailed across the floor like a velvet carpet, but Lilith didn't seem bothered at all, and instead all of herself was focused on the human partially under her curvy body. She looked at Bai Zemin's tightly closed lips, and her own lips as red as a flame, opened slightly. Bai Zemin immediately became awakened as an incredibly exquisite and seductive scent enveloped every fiber of his being. Even without him opening his eyes, the scent of fresh roses that belonged exclusively to Lilith embraced him in such a way that it was impossible for him not to know to whom the breath that slowly awakened his masculine side and threatened to turn him into a beast belonged. The scent emanating from Lilith's fleshy half-open lips with each labored breath was a seductive mix between the softness and delicacy of the vanillin that evoked purity and the provocative and sexy notes of jasmine. Jasmine? Bai Zemin unconsciously thought in another woman that was not Lilith when that fragrance reached him, and without him realizing it, his eyelashes moved. The movement in his eyelashes had been so fleeting and slight that even the most observant person of all would have difficulty noticing it, since Bai Zemin immediately controlled his facial expression before it completely broke and revealed that he had already regained consciousness. However, from a distance of now less than 5 centimeters and under Lilith's heated eyes, that small movement did not manage to sneak out unnoticed. As if awakening from some sort of dream or trance that was slowly sinking her deeper into a world far away from reality where worries did not exist and one could stay true to one's feelings without having to fear repercussions. Lilith blinked in surprise, and her movements stopped dead in their tracks when she noticed the subtle movement in the expression of the man who a split second ago was the only existence in her world. The first thing Lilith felt was shock and disbelief. She didn't really understand what had just happened, but for some reason she felt such a strong attraction to Bai Zemin that it seemed to draw her soul to him. It was as if his soul was trying to devour hers in a good way, as if it wanted to wrap itself around her whole existence, something Lilith's soul didn't seem to refuse. However, what made Lilith afraid was that she was still in her natural form. Even if she was willingly suppressing her own natural charm, for a moment she forgot to restrain herself and almost kissed Bai Zemin with 100% of her charm flowing towards her lips. If such a thing happened, regardless of how strong Bai Zemin was, he would probably end up turning into an unwilling toy, since he is just a first-order existence. Lilith took a deep breath, slowly calming down. She had lost her composure trying to make Shangyun Bingshu become aware of what she did or did not feel. However, now that she had recovered, a brilliant idea popped into her head, and the more she thought about it, the deeper it took root. She wanted to see what would come of this, but she was sure it would be good for the future. Repressing her natural charm to the limit she believed Bai Zemin was capable of bearing, and with a teasing smile on her face, Lilith slowly leaned closer and closer, slowly until her lips barely rubbed Bai Zemin's mouth playfully as tantalizingly as feeling a woman's delicate fingers caressing a man's bare skin. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 548 Outdoor Spanking. Fight between the little bitch and the vixen. As soft as the world's finest silk to the touch, this was the only way Bai Zemin could describe Lilith's lips. Even though it was only a friction so small that if he wasn't paying attention, it would pass unnoticed and so swift that it was less than a thousandth of a second, the difference between nothing and everything was too much to go unnoticed. Bai Zemin had to fight with everything he had not to purse his lips in an attempt to feel more of that delicious mouth that drew away even faster than it came. He thought his decisiveness and mental stronghold were firm enough to withstand everything, but for the first time since the apocalypse began, he realized how weak a man was when it came to a woman, not to mention a woman so beautiful that every other woman on earth paled to the point of being unworthy of mention. But in fact, what Bai Zemin did not know, since he had no way of comparing himself to another man, was that for him to manage to resist the temptation of Lilith, even though she was suppressing her own charm, could already be considered an amazing feat. It was highly likely that any other man on earth, regardless of whether he was a man experienced with women or not, would immediately become a puppet that Lilith could easily play with and give orders to at will. Just as Bai Zemin's heart was swaying between relief that those rich lips were moving away from his so that he could keep his sanity, and between disappointment after the loss of that blissful feeling and sensation, smooth as silk but hot as fire, another change occurred as he struggled to keep his eyes closed to avoid being discovered without knowing that he had actually already been discovered. Stop, huh? Lilith didn't even have time to do or say too much when two hands gripped her shoulders tightly and pulled her body back. Although she could have easily resisted the tug that forced her body up and away from the body of Bai Zemin, Lilith did not struggle at all and let Shangyun Bingshu take her away as she wished. Slowly, Lilith was forced to her feet by Shangyun Bingshu. The two women looked into each other's eyes, and after a moment of silence Lilith casually said, "Why are you interrupting?" Shangyun Bingshu's chest was rising and falling. Her face was slightly red, and her blue eyes flashed with fury like that of a lioness whose little puppy was touched while looking at Lilith, as if she wanted to jump on her and eat her entirely. Shangyun Bingshu pointed her index finger at Lilith and said loudly, "Shameless woman. How can you steal a kiss from him when he is passed out? Don't you have the slightest respect for his will?" Lilith blinked and could barely restrain the urge to laugh. She kept her composure and said confidently, "Don't worry about it. I'm sure Bai Zemin wants to kiss me too." "Nonsense!" Shangyun Bingshu cried out again in an agitated shout. Her eyes widened as anger grew and grew inside her like a volcano that could not be restrained and was about to erupt. "You think just because you say one thing I'll believe you? There is no way someone enjoys being physically abused, while inside he struggles to recover from the mental exhaustion after fighting without sleep for days. But he's already awake, so he was definitely expecting it." Lilith whispered in her heart as she looked at Shangyun Bingshu with mocking eyes. After a moment of silence, she said in a serious voice, "You really worry about nothing. Bai Zemin has shared a bed with me on more than one occasion. Seeing him naked is nothing new to me. From the tips of his toes to the last hair on his head, there is no part of him I haven't already seen. Do you think a little kiss means anything at this stage of the game?" Shangyun Bingshu's body trembled, and the more she listened the tighter she clenched her fists, until it reached a point where her small hands turned completely white as a result of poor blood circulation. Shangyun Bingshu's hair was slightly disheveled at this point, due to the strong warm winds. Her blue eyes disappeared from Lilith's line of sight as her lips moved softly and murmured words in a voice as low as the sound viruses make when moving. "LLU. Did you say something?" Lilith looked at her puzzled. However, she clearly knew what Shangyun Bingshu was going to say. Without waiting for the silver-haired beauty to continue, Lilith suddenly seemed to remember something important as she exclaimed, "Oh, I almost forgot that night when he smacked my butt so hard that he left the mark of his big hand on it as proof of his possessiveness." Lilith closed her eyes and folded her arms, asserting her huge bosoms even more as she shook her head and said dramatically, "Let me tell you, that night was really, bitch. I will kill you." Lilith didn't even have enough time to finish with her performance when what she was looking for to happen finally happened. Shangyuan Bingshu was nothing like the cold and indifferent woman who could always keep her cool and think things through with optimal rationality. If someone from the base were to see her current behavior, they would undoubtedly receive such a great shock that a heart attack was not too distant a fantasy. Like an enraged cat, she leaped towards Lilith and threw her to the ground. What the hell? Lilith was dumbfounded as she avoided hurting the woman who seemed to have gone mad. "Get off of me, are you crazy? I'll kill you. I told you to get off. You're a sneaky cat? What did you say? You sneaky cat? That's what you are. Brat, Bai Zemin is no one's man. Besides, I already told you he's my future husband." "Your future husband? Who would want to marry a perverted dirty bitch like you? You dirty bitch." Since when does lifelong educated Shangyuan Bingshu curse and say such words with complete naturalness? "Who the hell are you? What nonsense have you been mumbling for a while now? Stop comparing me to some unknown person and I at once, you perverted bitch." "You keep calling me perverted bitch, but aren't you the perverted little bitch with that naughty mouth of yours that keeps spitting out curses? You sure can cry naughty things in bed too. You're so dead." As he lay on the ground with his eyes closed, Bai Zemin began to sweat bullets, and not from the pain coming from his soul, but from what his sense of hearing managed to pick up from the world around him. My God! Bai Zemin almost fainted at the sound of two people rolling on the ground. What the hell was going on here? He wanted to stand up and scream but didn't dare at all. Besides, what about Shangyuan Bingshu? Leaving aside the fact whether what Lilith said was true or not, wasn't she being too obvious? Even someone who considered himself inexperienced in the field of love like Bai Zemin noticed the jealousy in her. No more than anything, just as Lilith said, what was with Shangyuan Bingshu and her constant dirty mouth? This Shangyuan Bingshu really was like a perverted little wildcat. No, more importantly, Lilith and Shangyuan Bingshu had met for the love of heavens. What happened while he was passed out? Before he fell unconscious, all Bai Zemin could remember was that after meeting Lilith again after being away for over a month, all the nerves in his body relaxed and the exhaustion that was waiting in a corner to assault him, unawares finally jumped out and hit him so hard that he was knocked out with a single attack. But he was sure that no more than a few minutes had passed since he passed out of consciousness. How did so much happen in such a short time? Bang, 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 bang. Suddenly, Bai Zemin began to hear bangs, and the next moment explosions of mana and magic power began to rumble all over the place. "Stop attacking, you perverted little bitch. You better stop defending yourself so I can kill you, slut." Bai Zemin was sweating more and more. At this point, even if his body was in the middle of a deadly battlefield, he didn't dare to open his eyes. "Bai Zemin, how much longer are you going to pretend to be sleeping? This little bitch friend of yours is trying my patience." Lilith looked in Bai Zemin's direction as she continued to block Shangyuan Bingshu's sword. "What?" Hearing Lilith's words, Shangyuan Bingshu stopped her fierce attacks and looked in Bai Zemin's direction with wide eyes. However, seeing that he remained immobile, she glared at Lilith again in fury and pointed her sword while saying, "Vixen, you dare to deceive me?" Then, she dashed forward and continued attacking. She did not activate ice magic as she knew it would be a waste of mana, so she could only rely on her physical stats and sword proficiency for this. "Vixen? Now I'll show you how a real vixen behaves then." Lilith gritted her teeth, and with a move that Shangyuan Bingshu couldn't manage to see, she disappeared from her previous position, reappearing right behind her. Then, as Bai Zemin held his breath, he heard a familiar yet unfamiliar sound. But if the sound alone was not enough, then the sharp cry that followed definitely confirmed it. Slut, how dare you smack me in the ass? Haha, now do you know what's good for you, you perverted little bitch? Lilith, I shall kill you. Haha, your ass is really tight and big, but still tender. Oh, your breasts are way bigger than they look under your clothes. Arg, how can you break through my armor? Stop acting like a cheap whore and fight with me." The sounds became wilder and wilder, as did the conversation between the two women who seemed to have lost their sanity during that brief but seemingly eternal moment. Lilith seemed to become more and more daring with each passing second, as her naughty giggles continued to sound non-stop, along with mocking words accompanied by even more perverted and naughty hand movements. On the other hand, Shangyuan Bingshu was becoming more and more loose with her vocabulary. For every spanking she received from Lilith without being able to hit back, or for every time her breasts were squeezed by her without being able to resist it, the dirty words coming out of her mouth grew as if a new dictionary was born in her brain out of nowhere. Xietain really couldn't help but think about what Lilith said earlier. With that dirty vocabulary of hers, wouldn't Shangyun Bingshu really be wild in bed despite her outward cold semblance? Blood manipulation. Xietain activated his most reliable skill to prevent a certain part of his body from soaring skyward, as his imagination went wild when an excessively seductive image appeared in his mind. Fortunately, even though the two women were at each other's throats, Xietain could tell with his eyes closed that somehow the two were getting to know each other better by doing whatever it was they were doing. "Welp, I'd better stay quietly here until this is all over," Xietain giggled like a little devil secretly. As the two women got to know each other better and childishly bickered between them, he could enjoy the tantalizing sounds coming from Lilith's spanks on Shangyun Bingshu and the resulting seductive scream moans on the part of the Ice Princess. However, in the heat of the moment, Xietain overlooked one thing, and that was that by activating mana manipulation, the fluctuation of mana would not go unnoticed by a monster like Shangyun Bingshu, who was adapting to mana even faster than him. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 549. Slowly Falling in Love. Indeed, while Xietain was secretly laughing to himself like a little devil and hoping for more fun from the naughty playfulness of the two women in the distance, his body suddenly shivered on its own as a kind of reflex reaction to the sudden drop in temperature. Xietan's brain worked overtime at lightning speed, and he quickly realized what his mistake had been. His dong had betrayed him. You really can't trust anyone in this world, let alone something with another head. Xietain wanted to cry, but he had no tears. He hurriedly opened his eyes and was about to get out of the approaching ice hell, but suddenly realized that his legs were still so weak that he could barely move them. As he looked to his right, his black eyes met eyes that, while blue as the sky inside, seemed to have a volcanic flame as they stared at him. It was clear that Shangyun Bingshu was not only pissed off, but in her strange state where she looked like a completely different woman than the woman Xietain knew. She didn't even care who she attacked for the sake of releasing her frustration. "Bingshu? Wait a second." Xietain suddenly felt a chill as he saw Shangyun Bingshu point her sword at him, and before he could finish his words a magic explosion sent a dense mist of frost flying in his direction. Women really were creatures that could go from 0 to 100 in an instant. Just when Xietain was feeling aggrieved about something that really wasn't his fault, the little pink dolphin that was lying on his chest gave a little jump, and when her face was pointed towards the approaching mist of frost, she opened her little mouth wide open. Swoosh! A whirlwind of fierce wind shot out from the mouth of the little xiao that flew in a straight line towards the mist of frost. The wind was strong enough to stop the mist of frost, but it did not have enough power to disperse the magic skill cast by such a powerful existence as Shangyun Bingshu. Even so, the whirlwind was enough to create a wall of wind that gradually froze, thus preventing the frost from continuing its path towards Xietain. Once the whirlwind and the mist of frost cancelled each other out, Shangyun Bingshu looked at the little pink dolphin resting on Xietan's body that was looking at her with the eyes of a mother looking at a child who had misbehaved. Shangyun Bing was not sure whether to laugh or cry. "Little bastard, you hide behind an animal?" Shangyun Bingshu gritted her teeth and looked at Xietain with a face as red as a ripe apple. She was clearly hiding the shame she felt by acting angry, but what else could she do? It wasn't like Shangyun Bingshu could just turn and run away, or much less get into a fight with the little pink dolphin who was super cute. Xietain looked at Shangyun Bingshu a little wordlessly. He slowly stood up with unsteady steps as he caressed the soft body of the little pink dolphin in his embrace as a show of thanks, to which the little creature responded by squirming comfortably and closing her eyes again. "Hello, Bingshu? Why are you so angry?" Xietain said as he looked at Lilith with furious eyes, clearly blaming her for all this. Shangyun Bingshu didn't even have time to say anything when Lilith responded to Xietan's gaze with a giggle. "She's angry because I said that you are my future husband. This vixen is really courting death." Shangyun Bingshu glared at Lilith angrily and whispered through gritted teeth. Did you say something, little bitch?" Lilith looked at Shangyun Bingshu and made a smacking gesture with her right hand. "Does your backside itch? Do you want this big sister to make your beautiful milk white skin as red as a tomato? You can fool others, but you can't fool me. I know you like it. You? All right. You two stop." Xietain hurriedly stepped forward to mediate. Although he wouldn't mind seeing how the words of Lilith came true and was even willing to pay a fortune for the sake of getting a ticket to the show on the front of the stage, the truth was that he couldn't say such a thing out loud, let alone stand aside, as his intention would be exposed right away. Bingshu, don't listen to what Lilith says. She's always like that, she likes to joke around a lot, he said, trying to appease the white lioness. Then, he looked at the little black fox inside. I say, Lilith, you really made a noisy entrance just getting back. Worthy of a diva like me, don't you think? Lilith smiled sweetly and shook her long black hair as if flaunting her beauty. Xietain rolled his eyes, and even the little pink dolphin in his embrace let out a low sound, as if she was laughing at what she had just heard. Xietain, who is this? Shangyun Bingshu stopped as she was about to say something. She took several deep breaths before looking at Lilith coldly and continuing, who is this lady? You don't need to hide it, I know she is the real Lily, and her real name is Lilith. Why are you so cold with me after all we've been doing together? Lilith looked like she was about to burst into tears as she looked at Shangyun Bingshu with sad and disappointed eyes. Even after my hands ran over every inch of your skin, you still act as if we never know each other? How cruel you can be. The words of Lilith, instead of making Shangyun Bingshu angrier, actually served to calm her down. She shook her head and looked at Lilith, now calmer, as she slowly said, now I understand why Xietain said what he said just now. You really don't know the meaning of the word shame. Xietain sighed, and after looking at Lilith for a moment as if telling her to stop playing games, he turned his gaze back to Shangyun Bingshu. Slowly, he began to explain, as you may know by now, her name is Lilith, and indeed she is the true form of Lily. Lily is just a fake character that the two of us came up with, in order for her to be able to suppress even more of her natural charm. Shangyun Bingshu stared at Lilith for several seconds, and was forced to admit that if the woman in front of her appeared in this form in front of all the faction members, it was likely that unforeseen things would happen. After all, even Shangyun Bingshu herself had difficulty averting her eyes from her body, the more she looked at her, let alone another woman with less natural pride and less mental strength, let alone men. Then, how do you know her? Shangyun Bingshu looked at Xietain. As she asked this question, she couldn't help but frown slightly. Come to think of it, a while back you said that even though you didn't have a girlfriend, you actually had a long-term contract with someone. Sometime later, that night in the mutant forest when I told you about my past and you told me about yours, you said that I was the second person you had a long-term contract with. Could you explain about that too? The eyes of Lilith flashed peculiarly as she looked at Shangyun Bingshu, with a faint, undetectable smile at the corner of her lips. All the questions Shangyun Bingshu had just asked were questions that aimed to find out about the relationship between Lilith and Xietain, which meant that she was undoubtedly worried about it. Otherwise, why would she ask that and not be more curious about the bestial strength of Lilith? However, Xietain was not only inexperienced in these matters, but at the moment he was too busy trying to keep the two women in front of him from fighting anymore, because while Lilith might be joking, he wasn't sure if the next moment she would mistakenly end up slapping Shangyun Bingshu to death. Better safe than sorry. After taking a moment to carefully think things over, Xietain looked at Lilith, and seeing that she didn't seem to disagree with letting Shangyun Bingshu know the truth, he slowly explained. Lilith is an existence that I owe a lot to. Leaving aside my family, you could say that she is the living being I trust the most, since she has been at my side since the first instant the apocalypse broke out on Earth, right after the soul record displayed my status window in my retina for the first time. What? She's been there since the first instant? Shangyun Bingshu couldn't stop her voice from coming out to interrupt. How is that possible? It was Lilith who answered this time. She looked at Shangyun Bingshu and slowly explained, it is possible since I am not a living being of this world. Shangyun Bingshu was taken aback, but as she looked at Xietain and saw him nod slightly, she finally accepted the reality. She couldn't help but gasp in shock as she looked at Lilith with wide eyes. Let me introduce myself again, but for real this time. Lilith smiled slightly and gave a slight graceful bow, as her red eyes stared into the blue eyes of the woman less than 2 meters away. My name is Lilith, and my power scale is at the initial stage of the 6th order. My current race is Succubus, a demon with passive and active charm magic, strong enough to interfere with the thoughts and feelings of other living beings, regardless of race or gender. The little mouth of Shangyun Bingshu opened slightly, barely exposing the upper tip of her pearly teeth. She looked at Lilith in shock with wide eyes, and for a moment her brain went blank. Succubus? Like the legends that circulated on Earth? Demon? A demon like the one in the Christian religion? Besides 6th order? What level of power did someone on that scale represent? A single Fourth Order Asura Emperor was enough to force Xietain to retreat, and a Fourth Order Ghost Emperor had practically forced him to eternal damnation. Didn't this mean that someone in the Sixth Order of Power could easily crush all the reality she knew? I've been watching you for a long time, Shangyun Bingshu. Lilith slowly straightened her posture and smiled faintly. Previously, I thought I knew you well enough to not be surprised by anything. However, after joking around with you a bit today, I realize that you're actually completely different from what I thought you were. I guess that makes it more interesting after all. This time it was Xietan's turn to be surprised. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he understood. It was natural for Lilith to be curious about Shangyun Bingshu, considering that the latter one was existence bright enough to overshadow everyone, if not for Xietan's existence. Besides, at this rate Shangyun Bingshu could become a higher existence as fast as Lilith did, or even sooner. This alone was enough to draw anyone's attention. Shangyun Bingshu took a deep breath before letting all the air in her lungs be expelled. Then, she slowly nodded and looked at Xietain. All right, I understand. Please continue. Xietain nodded and continued calmly. Lilith has been standing next to me, supporting me and giving me basic, but at the same time crucial information for people like us, who were thrown into hell without any warning. Thanks to her I didn't waste even a second thinking about the skill scrolls. Thanks to her I knew about the existence of the soul stones, before too much time passed and left, who knows how many behind due to lack of information. Thanks to her I learned about the soul record, about the universe in general, about the future evolutions of our world, and many other things more. Xietain paused to look at Lilith, and his eyes softened as he slowly continued. To be honest, even though my stats were above average from the start, and my mana and magic were monstrously high from second one, I doubt that my past self could have reached the level of power that my current self has as smoothly and quickly as I did if it wasn't for Lilith's help. She is a woman I respect and admire from the depths of my soul, and to whom I owe so much that it is no exaggeration to say that my life alone could repay it. Lilith looked at Xietain with the same soft eyes he was using to look at her. Every word he uttered, his tone of voice, the thankfulness that seemed to come from the deepest part of his heart, all this made Lilith's heartstrings tug hard. It was hard for a woman who was already interested in a man not to fall, when that man looked at her with the eyes that Xietain was using to look at Lilith. The approximately 33 to 34 days that they were separated served to make Lilith realize that Xietain was no longer an end to a means. During that time, she was forced to change many things she had long planned for the sake of adjusting to her new, slowly discovered heart. However, when she saw him again today, she was forced to reaffirm even more those feelings she was slowly discovering. Although she could not say for sure that what she felt was love, Lilith was certain that she did not want the man in front of her to vanish from her life. Undoubtedly, Lilith was sure that at this pace, sooner rather than later she would end up in love. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 550 Slowly exposing their hearts and feelings for each other. Chapter 550 Slowly exposing their hearts and feelings for each other. Shangyun Bingshu observed the way Xietain looked at Lilith, and also noticed the way she looked back at him. Even an idiot could easily tell that the two of them felt more than friendship for each other. Even more so considering how soft Xietan's voice was when he was talking about Lilith. His voice was as soft as that of a father talking to a newborn baby, and he was afraid of scaring it, so he was taking the highest level of care and tenderness possible. This was the first time Shangyun Bingshu had seen the always seriouser and different Xietain acting this way, and the fact that all that gentleness was contained within him surprised her more than the fact that all that sweetness was being directed at a woman. For every second that passed and she discovered new things about him, the more Shangyun Bingshu became convinced that Xietain would be an awesomely great partner to decide to join with, to spend the rest of the life with. However, she soon dismissed those thoughts. There was no time for that. Even if Shangyun Bingshu selfishly decided to ignore the fact that her best friend was in love with him, Shangyun Bingshu herself was not even sure of her own heart. In fact, were it not for the fact that Lilith had appeared in front of her today, and had been continuously pestering her with comments that made her realize that Xietain was not just another ordinary man to her, Shangyun Bingshu would possibly still not have realized this fact. If Lilith knew that Shangyun Bingshu had woken up thanks to her constant teasing, she would probably feel happy, since from the beginning, this was what she aspired to achieve. Like Shangyun Bingshu, Lilith was a very proud woman. Therefore, if she eventually captured the heart of Xietain, she wanted to do it without hiding from anyone or anything, such that in the distant future, no woman would be able to tell her that she had played cunningly. A clear fight for all to see. One in which, in the event of deciding that she had finally fallen in love, Lilith did not plan to lose. Lilith had suffered too much and lost too many things throughout a relatively short, but at the same time long life to be willing to give up on this feeling that made every day look different for her. She was not willing to let go of that wonderful sensation of feeling alive again, regardless of what others might think or say. After taking a deep breath to calm his heart, Bai Zemin looked at Shangyun Bingshu again, and despite noticing the complicated look in her eyes, he decided to continue with his explanation from before. The reason why I said back then that I have a long-term contract with a woman is because Lilith needs my help to achieve her goal. As you may well be thinking now, a goal that even a sixth-order existence cannot complete on its own definitely shouldn't be something simple. Therefore, at least for the years to come, it is safe to say that she and I will be together. Bai Zemin said nothing about the eternal future. He did not comment that he expected to spend his whole life together with Lilith either as friends or whatever. Such things had to come naturally, and if destiny willed it to be so then it would be so. And if not, then that meant that the bonds between Bai Zemin and Lilith were never meant to be strong in the first place, and the relationship between the two was nothing more than a relationship based solely on benefits, where feelings were weaker than they seemed. Then, Bai Zemin smiled slightly towards Shangyun Bingshu and said playfully, "The same applies to you. It may take tens of years, centuries, millennia, even eons, but in the end, we aim to rule the universe for the sake of our loved ones, right? At least until that goal is achieved, both you and I are bound by the promises we made to each other in the mutant forest that night. Therefore, you are my second long-term contract." "I see, so that's why it's a long-term contract," Shangyun Bingshu muttered under her breath as she looked down at the ground, lost in her own thoughts. Too many things had happened all together. Shangyun Bingshu needed time to process all the information she had just received, as it was too important to think very carefully about what she would do next. However, regardless of who Lilith was or whatever her intentions were, Shangyun Bingshu felt that what she had to do in the short term had not changed at all. She raised her head and looked Bai Zemin in the eyes. "Bai Zemin, Shangyun Bingshu seemed to have summoned up the courage to say something, but when her blue eyes met those dark eyes that seemed to draw her soul like black holes, all that courage disappeared, and her spirit deflated like a balloon that had all the air sucked out of it. Tell me," he asked, confused by the sudden impulse that soon came to nothing. "It's nothing," Shangyun Bingshu said as she shook her head. She took the spatial storage ring and extended her hand forward, saying in a slightly faded voice, "Here, your ring. The space inside should be enough to store what's left." I see. "Thank you," he said, nodding slightly without pursuing the matter too much as he was really tired and needed rest badly. Even being on his feet was painful for him currently. As Bai Zemin looked around and walked towards where the lifeless bodies of the remaining mutant beasts were piled up, Lilith looked at Shangyun Bingshu deeply and said in a voice that only both of them could hear, "I hope you won't regret this later." Shangyun Bingshu looked at her coldly and replied, "What the hell are you talking about?" Lilith shook her head, and as she walked towards Bai Zemin she said without looking back, "I told you before and I'll say it again, you can fool others, you can even fool yourself. But you can't fool me. Just remember my words, when you realize your foolishness, it will probably be too late for you, and when you feel like crying, you will only have yourself to blame for it." Shangyun Bingshu watched silently as Lilith joined Bai Zemin. The two were chatting freely and carefree. The gaze of Bai Zemin was still silky smooth when he looked at Lilith, and the smiles on Lilith's face were no different from that of the happiest woman in the world, even though they were just chatting idle chit-chat with each other. It would be a lie to say that she did not feel anger deep in her heart. However, unlike the anger she felt before, this anger she felt now could not be released as it was wrapped tightly by a great layer of anxiety, impotence, and above all of not knowing what to do. Bai Zemin and Lilith had many things to talk about. After spending so many days away from each other, when they met again there was no awkwardness at all, only calm and comfort. Just like coming home after a long period of working abroad. For the moment, neither he nor she mentioned serious matters as they tactically decided to first make up for some lost time to break down that thin stone wall that had inevitably appeared between the two of them. The one who had to make the most effort was undoubtedly Lilith. She clearly noticed that even though Bai Zemin did not seem to have changed much, he somehow tried to keep some distance from her when it came to matters of the heart, something that just before she left for Cramworld did not happen anymore. The effect of the Skillstone heart might have weakened tremendously after so many cracks appearing and the rune engraved into Bai Zemin's soul, but this did not mean that the effect was no longer strong, even less so considering that Lilith fell under the duplicate effect due to her being a woman. Bai Zemin still remembered how bad he felt when Lilith disappeared just like that. Therefore, he had inadvertently created some distance between the two of them. It was just a thin barrier that Lilith was confident in breaking quickly, but which she hoped would not appear again, as it made her heart sting so much. "Sorry for disappearing without even giving you time to say goodbye or explaining too much," she said softly, and didn't dare to look Xietain in the eyes as she whispered, "It's just that at that moment I didn't know what to say. Even though I'm old enough to be a mother to your parents, these kinds of emotions that slowly reawaken in me again after a long time suddenly don't let my train of thoughts be clear." This was the first time Lilith and Xietain openly touched on the sentimental topic. In the past, they both avoided this kind of conversation for different reasons, while she believed that it was only something temporary that would disappear after a certain period of time. Xietain saw these kinds of feelings as useless, that in the long run would become an even greater burden than the one he carried on his back. However, after being away from each other for so many days in a row, somehow the two of them matured a lot. Although the words of Lilith implied that she had been in love in the past, Xietain was not angry at all, and on the contrary, he understood her perfectly. Lilith was a woman who, despite her appearance, had lived at least 2 or 3 times as long as Xietain had lived now, and it would be completely irrational to be angry at the fact that she had experienced love when Xietain might not even have been born yet, let alone met her. Besides, based on what Lilith had told him so far, it was clear that this love spell from her past had been fleeting, something that shimmered for a brief moment before fading away, leaving behind only some memories, but no proof of its existence. Xietain sighed, and as he embraced the little pink dolphin with his left arm, he reached out his right hand and gently caressed Lilith's hair. He felt the softness of the strand of midnight black hair in his hand and said in a low voice, "It's okay. Let's see where this takes us, one step at a time. Without rushing anything." He looked into her eyes and smiled. "At the end of all this, what awaits us is an eternity, isn't it? We have all the time in the world to do things right and not regret it later. I just hope that next time you'll think a little more about how I'll feel if you just tell me you're leaving and walk away without saying much more." "I'm sorry." Lilith nodded, still looking down. She looked like an obedient little wife who was being reprimanded by her husband after committing a significant mistake, and she looked really cute. The current Lilith was a colossal contrast compared to the mighty bloody succubus who terrified the members of the demonic army every time they remembered her ruby-red eyes glowing with indifference and coldness. Xietain nodded in satisfaction, and as if remembering something and to change the topic now that everything had become clear, he held his right hand in front of Lilith, and while pointing his chin towards his index finger, said with an arrogant smile, "Hey Lilith, look at this ring, don't you think it's cool?" Lilith looked at the ring on Xietan's finger and blinked in confusion. However, remembering the words of Xietain Bingshu said before, something clicked in her mind. That's a glint of surprise flashed in her eyes as her little mouth moved lightly, uttering words of disbelief. Xietain closed his eyes and nodded in satisfaction as he held his hand in the air. However, the next words uttered by Lilith caused him to almost fall to the ground on his butt. "Congratulations, I didn't know you were engaged." Xietan's eyes widened, and the corner of his mouth twitched a couple of times as he growled, "All right, I admit that was a good one. Had I learned from you? Didn't you say similar words to me when I showed you my storage ring at the beginning of Earth's evolution? I was waiting to return your joke." Lilith giggled like an imp while mentally scrubbing her hands. For a moment, the two were lost in their own world. Meanwhile, a short distance away and watching the interaction between the two, another woman was struggling against herself and feelings that may or may not grow with the passage of time.